So let me quickly review where we are. Okay, so we just started the third module as we learned from the previous lecture. Okay, so in this module we are trying to make sense of the number, right? So as I just mentioned in last lecture, so macro is about two big things. One is growth. The other is business cycle. So in the I guess this now is the third module. In the second module, we already talked about growth. Growth is going to be depending on technology, human capital, physical capital, or maybe even labor supply. So this is long term. And the business cycle is about the fluctuation. Right? The fluctuation of GDP, sometimes we call it Y, and the fluctuation of labor supply, sorry, unemployment, right? Let's call it U. Okay, and then so in the rest of this class, we are going to focus on business cycle, right? And then so furthermore, so in terms of business cycle, so where we start. So the first thing we're going to learn is, so we try to understand what determines why. So when we talk about business cycle, it's probably like short term. And in short term is how we're going to assess, understand the determination of why. Okay. First, we are going to start with demand side. So meaning, so we are going to focus on the expenditure. Okay. This is first. The second, I want to remind you. So GDP, so we can look at GDP through three different angles, right? So this includes expenditure, includes income, but of course, let's use a semicolon, of course, product. The first two largely is in the demand side, and this more in the supply side. Okay, so this is regarding how we understand this. Now, third things, okay, so we start with demand side, and the demand side eventually is going to look at expenditure, income. Okay, and then, so that just means, okay, so we're going to look at Y equal to C plus I. So we're going to simplify it. No government for the moment. No import and export for the moment. Okay, so C plus I. But then, so we are going to see C consumption is going to be a function of income. Right? Or to summarize, so where we are going to say, okay, so Y on the left-hand side, so this is the expenditure, total expenditure, equal to C is one expenditure, and I is another expenditure. But C is going to be a function of Y, but this Y is called income, right? And similarly, I is going to be a function of I versus income, right? So that's where we are going to do. But for now, so we need to finish the discussion regarding to macro relationship, basically how C adjusts with income and how potential I change with income. In the previous lecture, we have looked at this part, right? So regarding to this, so the way we approach is we start with multiplier. Okay, what's multiplier? So basic idea is, so our economy, in terms of macro economy, so households, business are interconnected. So they are interconnected in the sense, so one penny I spend becomes somebody else's income, right? So in that sense, we are interconnected. So we are not isolated. Okay, as we are going to see later. So we are going to revisit the paradox of thrifty. And why there's a paradox of thrifty, or in a broader sense, why macro is not a simple summation of micro. It's because we are connected. Okay, so if I cut my spending, okay, so this is going to be affect somebody else. Because I cut $1 of spending, then someone in the economy is going to lose $1 of income. But this connection won't stop there. Because so the somebody lose $1 income, he or she is going to cut spending. And then the third person is going to lose some income. So you see, we are connected. So that's just the idea of multiplier. But then, so inside this multiplier, we talk about MPC. So that just tells you to what extent we are connected, right? So just extreme example, if MPC equal to 0, okay, so we are not connected. So for $1 I receive, I'm not going to pass on to next person. Okay, so we are completely isolated. But on the other hand, if MPC equal to 1, so essentially we are the same person because I keep spending. For each income I receive, I'm going to completely spend, right? So this keep moving. That's the MPC. Now the third thing we learn is the consumption function, right? So this consumption function essentially is going to link your disposable income with your consumption, right? So now let's go to the slides. So that's pretty much what we have discussed for this lecture in previous time, right? So where we are, so we have learned this, right? MPC, multiplier, okay? So again, so this is a multiplier. This multiplier equal to summation of this larger term, right? Okay, and actually they just reflect, so this individual term reflects the connection. So we are connected in the macroeconomy, right? And this MPC just tells us how strongly we are connected. The smaller the MPC, the loose we are connected. The bigger MPC, the stronger we are connected, right? So that's one way to understand. Okay, so we have seen some examples, right? So now we're going to skip these. So just quickly show you, yeah, so this is the consumption function we discussed. C is households, consumer spending. It's going to proportional to your disposable income. Okay, and this mathematical relationship or this proportion is given by MPC. For each dollar I earn, how much I'm going to spend, right? So this is MPC. And then so we have A, which is autonomous spending. So that's essentially the amount I must spend, even I have zero income. So that refers to the amount you must to spend so that you can survive, right? The way to understand that is, in general, for given country, so the warmer the weather, so in general, so this A is going to be lower, because simply because winter is difficult, right? So you spend more on winter to keep yourself warm. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the way to understand. Okay, and but certainly, so in reality, so MPC is going to be different from person to person. For a low-income household, usually the MPC is larger than a billionaire, right? Because for the billionaire, so they already have lots of consumption. For additional $1 or additional like 1 unit of money they receive, so they may spend a smaller fraction. But for lower income, for someone who lives in the minimum wage, for each dollar they earn, she or he may spend the entire portion. And so that's usually what happens in reality. But this is macroeconomic class. So usually, so we are going to look at MPC in terms of the aggregate or the average across the population, right? So if we look at in that scale, so usually we are going to simplify. Actually, this won't hurt the analysis. It says the MPC is a fixed number. All right, okay. So that just finished this consumption function. And this consumption function can easily extend to aggregate, right? So that's what we already done. And this is the interpretation of this consumption function, how consumer spending change with disposable income. The slope of this consumption function will give us the MPC. How we understand? The slope will say, okay, so if I increase the horizontal line by 1 unit, okay, and then so by how much the vertical line increase? Okay, so that's a slope, but that converts to delta C divided by delta Y. So that gives you MPC. Okay, and here, so the interception is A. How we understand that? So at this interception, so you have disposable income YD equal to 0, right? So then, so this A, this autonomous spending. So regardless what happens, so you must spend certain amount to survive. Okay, right. So this is consumption function, and so this is how the consumption function fits with the data, right? So we look at 2013. Okay, very good. So now we can easily or convert this into aggregate. Okay. All right, so we have seen this before, I believe. Now let's see what can cause a shift of the aggregate consumption function. So by the way, if the consumption function shift up, usually it means the consumption increase. Okay, the way we understand is that just means for given amount of disposable income, you're going to spend more, right? Okay. So on the other hand, so if it goes down or decrease, so that means consumption decrease, right? So what a factor can cause the consumption function move up? So usually, so it happens when consumer expect higher aggregate income or wealth. Why a higher income wealth leads to consumption increase? It's because so you have confidence, you have more money to spend, so you want to increase your consumption. Just think about if there's a housing market boom, stock market boom, or even generally think about so as a college student, you are expecting you are getting a good job in 1 or 2 years, and usually that gives you confidence to spend, right? So this idea of how income or wealth, usually expect higher income wealth, is going to lead to higher consumption. Right. On the other hand, so if you're expecting your income will decline, and then the consumption will decline, right? So if everyone do the same things, then of course, in the aggregate, so the consumption will decline, right? Okay, so now we can look at US data through the history. Okay. On the left-hand side, we have, so by the way, so this 33 as refers to 1933. And this 40 refers to 1940. And so each dot, so for example, this dot, they just give us the aggregate disposable income in US economy versus total consumer spending in US economy. Right, and then, so this dot is represent the aggregate disposable income versus total consumer spending throughout the 20th century and during the 30s. That roughly that's the time period of Great Depression, right? And then, so from the left-hand side, we can see, so this data can be almost perfectly approximate by a straight line, but this is exactly consumption function, right? Look at it here. Now we move to the right-hand side. So in the right-hand side, so we extend the data. So this part goes to here or refers to here. Let me erase everything so it's easier to see. So this part refers to the data here. Now what happened here? So this is post World War II. And by comparing post-World War II with Great Depression, so there are a couple of things we notice. Number one, so this dot, you probably is going to approximate with a line above this line, right? So that just means, so during the post-World War II, the aggregate consumption increased. But what is behind the increase in aggregate consumption after World War II? And then so we need to link to the earlier slide, right? So largely because, so there's a booming in our economy. So everyone expecting higher wealth or income. So that's exactly in line with the economic outlook after post-World War II period, right? Because we experienced the peace, we experienced the reconstruction of global economy, right? And the other things we should notice is this curve. If you fit this curve, so MPC is going to go larger than the here. Or in other words, the slope becomes steeper, right? So during Great Depression, so MPC is 0.7. Now here, so MPC is probably equal to 0.8. Again, that also reflects the increase or improved confidence, right? So you're confident about the economy, they are more willing to spend, right? So this is aggregate consumption function. Now, for these slides, we have one small things, but very important things to understand. Remember, so Y equal to C plus I in this section, in this simplified economy, right? So we have talked about C. Now we are going to exclusively look at I. I, we say it's small in a sense, if we look at total expenditure data or look at GDP. So GDP, so earlier we said GDP Y equal to C plus I plus G plus NX. Okay, for US economy, this usually is negative. And C, not sure anyone remember, C as a fraction of GDP is a big number, right? For the US economy, this is close to 70%. All right, so this number is fairly small, it's close to 10%. So in that sense, investment spending is small. It is small, but doesn't mean it's not important. Actually, it is a powerful and important factor that determines our total GDP. The way we understand that is just look at the change. Okay, so those are 6 recent recessions. So we just look at change in consumer spending and a change in investment spending. So when recession hits, usually people tighten their belt, reduce consumption. That's normal, right? Because you are worried about the outlook. But then, so in terms of investment, it also decreases. But now in terms of magnitude, it's just in a different magnitude, different level, right? Because you adjust your consumption. So in a range of 1%. But now in terms of investment, usually it's between 10 and 20%. So that means the fluctuation or the scale is 10 times, right? So in that sense, it's powerful, right? But this powerful adjustment is going to have important impact on the determination of Y, and furthermore, it's going to have important impact or significant impact on the fluctuation of output, particularly in business cycle, right? Now let's see, so what can drive the change in investment spending? Okay. So here we have a couple of factors. So this includes interest rate, expected future real GDP, and a current level of production capacity. Okay? So how we understand the impact of each factor? But first, let me just introduce a concept. So we are going to see that in the next lectures. Okay. So this concept is called planned investment spending. Okay, so first, this is investment spending. Okay, what is considered as investment spending? So usually you buy something durable as a household. So if you're in the household, you buy a washing machine, usually it's considered investment. Okay? But however, if you buy a couple of gallons of milk, so that's not investment, right? And also in general, so the business, they buy machinery, that's considered investment, or they put money to renovate the building. So infrastructure, so those investment. So what is plan? So usually, so the business, so need to do some planning. Even households need to do some planning, right? So this investment spending is planned ahead. So this is called planned investment spending. But what factors matter to the size of your planned investment spending? Okay, so this including the following things. Let's go one by one. Right. Interest rate. So first of all, what is interest rate? What does interest rate means to investment? Let's just think about housing or the purchase of house. So purchase of house is an investment because again, so the house usually lasts for many years, right? Then the cost of investing in house usually is reflected by the interest rate, which is like a mortgage, right? So like here, mortgage, right? And then first we look at the data. So if the interest rate decline, look here, and then so the housing market or the purchase of house increase. So that is translated into lower interest rate, higher investment spending. Why is that? It's because, so if interest rate decline, it becomes cheaper to own a house, right? Because the interest rate is what you need to pay to borrow money from the bank to finance the house, right? So that's why lower interest rate usually higher investment. Okay, so this is the first factor. But certainly, if the interest rate increase, and usually so the investment will decline and becomes more expensive, right? You can ask yourself a question. So if you want to buy something, okay, now you face two scenarios. Scenario number one, you have to pay cash upfront. And scenario number two, so the store offer you zero interest rate to finance your purchase. So under which case you are more likely to make purchase decision. Okay, so I guess most people will prefer the second one, right? Because you can just you put like a zero down pay and you pay later. But of course, like business understand that that's why they just offer this cheap credit, right? So that just give you an idea. So the interest rate matters to investment. Okay. Second factor, actually we bring together, right? So if the business expect future real GDP to decline, what this means? So first of all, let's just remind you later. So why you can think about why is the income, is the expenditure, is the product. So if we are expecting future GDP decline, Okay, one way to think about is the future expenditure is going to decline, a future income is going to decline. And that just means, okay, the future demand of the goods you produce is going to decline. If that is the case, what is the point for you to increase investment? That will be counterproductive, right? Because you know in the future, so the demand is weak. If I add in investment, it's going to make me harder to sell my stock, right? So in that sense, so the expected future real GDP is going to affect your investment. On the other hand, so your production capacity. So which is, it means, okay, what currently, to what extent you have utilized all your capacity. Just think about like in a restaurant, right? So during the regular day, so how many people sit in your table? If it's pretty much empty, it doesn't make any sense for you to add additional tables, right? On the other hand is if during the dinner time, so there's like a long waiting line. And then usually that means it's a good idea to expand by adding more tables, right? Okay, to finish this part, so we look at a few concepts and then we move to the next lecture, right? So they are interconnected. Inventory. So these stocks of goods held to satisfy future sales. Okay, so this is inventory. Just think about the local car dealership. So usually, so they need to have certain amount of car, okay, park in the garage, so that when there's a potential customer comes in, once a deal is caught, so they get the car. You go to grocery store, whether it's Target or Baker, right? So if you want a certain amount of egg, okay, and then so they have egg for you, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so inventory investment. So this is the value of the change in total inventory. Just give you an idea, okay? So again, use the car dealership as an example. At the beginning of the year or beginning of the season, so they usually have certain amount of car, right? Let's say, for example, so they have 10 Honda. So that's where they start. Now, throughout the year, throughout the season, each month, so they are going to sell some. Let's just use negative sign. That's because sale, right? But usually, so if you go to any dealership, they will tell you, so we have cars coming every month. Why? So that you're going to feel the need, right? So this plus. Okay, but these things are kind of, this is their plan, right? So they are going to plan. So how many cars we need order from Detroit or from wherever they got the car. But this sale is kind of random, right? So they don't know, so they cannot control. So how many people is going to show up? But anyway, so the increase, this coming from added inventory minus the sale. So that's going to change their inventory, right? And this change in inventory is called investment, so inventory investment, right? So we will see that the same example later, okay? And then, so we have unplanned inventory investment. So this is the difference, right? Unplanned change inventory. When actual sales are more or less than business expected, right? So lastly, so you have actual investment spending. So essentially just this I equal to planned investment plus unplanned investment, right? So now, so we have finished discussion of C as a function of Y and I. Okay, now we are ready to go to the next lecture, right? So now let's go to the next one to understand the determination of income, right?